Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming at you from the Mozaic Works studios, and today I have a pretty difficult topic to discuss, and one that I've been thinking about for a very long time, probably some of the longest time for anything really that I've thought about, and that is about developer happiness. And I think that there are a number of things that we can discuss about around this area. First of all, the prompt for this is the fact that I've seen a lot of agile coaches. Well, there's actually part of agile coaches that avoid and don't like talking about things like commitment, responsibility, professionalism, craft, sometimes, because they prefer talking about developer happiness, and they don't like things like metrics and goals and so on. And they focus a lot on what makes developers happy, and agile is successful when teams are happy and when developers are happy and so on. And I think the goal of having developers happy is definitely something good, something I can agree with. But I don't agree that you can avoid things like commitment, responsibility, professionalism in order to get there, and even metrics. And here is why. This is what I will try to explain in this video, and it might be quite difficult. So bear with me, and maybe we'll need to do a follow-up if we have enough comments to this. First point is, what is happiness in general? And I know this is a very philosophical thing, but actually I have read a few books about happiness, and some of the more advanced science surrounding happiness is in behavioral psychology. Dan Gilbert is one author that wrote a book, Stumbling on Happiness. He also has a TED Talk. And basically what they discovered is that happiness is something that is a state of mind. It is created by your brain, by your mind. So it's a subjective thing. It's a subjective way of approaching situations. And some of the examples they gave is, with people who have gone through tremendous things, through difficulties, through things that everyone looking at them logically would say, okay, there's no way these people can be happy. And instead, many of them are saying, we are very happy. So it's very likely that happiness is something that is created by your mind. And based on what I've read, one thing that can help with this is if you are thankful, if you are grateful. Everyday gratefulness is something that helps your mind stay in this state of something approximating happiness. And the reason for that is because as people, we tend to react a lot more to negative stimulus than to positive stimulus. I don't remember the exact ratio, but it's like 10 times more to negative than to positive. And because of this, it's very useful to remind yourself again and again that you are grateful for certain things. Can be your family. It can be that you are not working in a field in the sun, and you are working in an office writing code, doing something that you love. Or it can be your social relationships, your colleagues, the fact that you live in a country that's not at war. There can be a lot of these things. But beyond that, if we want to explore the point of developer happiness, and if this is just a very personal and subjective experience, what we can do is to talk about other factors that can help you at least alleviate suffering or feel better about yourself. And actually feel that you are progressing, that you are advancing, that you are doing something good or better than you did it before. And this is what we'll focus on today. Now, of course, there's a lot more to this. You could argue, and with very good reason, that happiness, or at least being content, is also a factor of your social relationships, of your family, of your general environment, of your well-being, and that you don't have any immediate concerns for your future, and so on. And definitely that's true, but to explore those things, it would mean to go into a lot of psychology and into a lot of things that I'm not very adept at. So instead of that, we'll focus on where you spend roughly a third of your day, and that is working. And what we can say about working is that there are things that you can do in order to more or less improve your happiness at work. And incidentally, those things tend to have very little to do with whether you have PlayStations or table tennis tables or things like that, or I don't know, games and other kinds of stuff there. And here are a few things that I think are important. The first one is having clear goals. Second one, commitment and responsibility. Third, flow. Fourth, craft or professionalism. And actually, let's add another one, which is have fun. A whimsical experiences. I think these are also very important. So let's start with the first one. There are two aspects with clear goals. One is clarity and one is goals. It's good to have a goal. In fact, I would argue that one of the key things for anybody, many people imagine that if you would be staying idle and if you don't have to do anything, then you would be happy. And I think psychology shows that it's not the case. As human beings, we need to have a goal. We need to work on something. Because otherwise we'll just figure out ways of spending our time. And that's okay for a while. I actually have this direct experience in that I took an almost full sabbatical year, but it wasn't really good for my state of mind. Instead, I started feeling much better once I started having a goal, doing some more things, getting back into actually doing something. So I think that most people who got into software development, they want to build things. They like building things. They like solving problems. Solving problems for people who are actually using that thing. And I think that, and actually let me add another one, which is connection. To team, to users, etc. So, and it's best when you have a clear goal. Unfortunately, many organizations fail on that. And instead of giving clear goals, they give very politically convoluted, negotiated goals, like, let's make the world better or let's make more money, which are not really good. They are not clear goals. They lack clarity and they lack the goal aspect. Even in those situations, basically what you can do is to start from where you are given and to take a big problem, split into small problems that are very clear, very well defined, and turn those into your goals. And this is something that helps a lot. And then iterate, right? So solve the small problems and then iterate here. Test-driven development is a very good way of doing this. And as we'll see, test-driven development also helps with flow. It's not the only way. And in fact, you can apply a lot of the spirit of test-driven development without actually doing test-driven development, which is something that many advanced practitioners of test-driven development have confessed to. So it's not necessary to always do test-driven development in order to achieve this goal, but having this mindset of taking a large problem, splitting into smaller problems, solving those, it just gives you the same sense that you get from a game, right? In many games, you need to go from A to B, but in order to get to B, you must first do C and D and E and Z. And for each of those goals, you need to get better and so on. So iterate and improve, which is something we'll talk about here in Craft. The second factor, I think, is commitment and responsibility. It might sound weird that I believe that commitment and responsibility are good for your happiness, because I think many developers associate these words with misery. But in reality, here is what commitment and responsibility is and how it works to make you feel better. Let's say you get a problem that you don't know how to solve and you don't know whether you can solve it in 3 days, which is what is required of you. One way would be to say, oh, I have no idea, I don't know where to start, kind of negate, deny, avoid, any kind of avoidance tactics. Another way would be to say, well, I'll give it my best and come back to you, which is kind of a cop-out. The third one would be, okay, this is what I will do. I will commit to solving this in 3 days. I have no idea how to do it right now, and I'll keep you posted of anything that I learn in case anything happens. And then what can happen in time, in those 3 days, this is also a leap of faith, by the way, because I have faith in myself that I can get as close as possible to this goal, or maybe even get over that goal. And I might also say, but in order to do this, I will need somebody to sit with me, or complete silence, or no meetings, or so on. And that's perfectly fine. So you take this kind of commitment, and then you take a leap of faith. Now, what can happen in these 3 days? At the end of these 3 days, you can solve the problem, in which case you'll be happy because you did something you weren't sure you are able to do. So you've learned something about yourself. It might happen that you solve the problem partially, but kind of good enough. Or it might happen that, I don't know, it's a complete disaster, and I tried to solve it, I did my best, but it just wasn't enough. I just couldn't find how to do it. And in both these two cases, what you end up with is a challenge for yourself. Okay, it won't feel great because I committed to this. I couldn't achieve this. Now, let's be honest, in most cases, it's not a big thing for the organization. If I couldn't achieve it, okay, the organization won't go bankrupt, most likely. But on a personal level, I couldn't achieve that. Then I can look and say, okay, if I were to do this thing again, how would I do it differently? And this is where I get to improve myself, and I'm looking at techniques that can help me get better. And this cycle is something that's very valuable, because if you can feel like you are evolving and that you can take on more responsibility, more difficult problems of other types than you did until now, you end up learning that you can overcome obstacles. And no matter how big an obstacle you'll see, you won't be afraid of it. So at least it will reduce your misery in time. Because when there is a really big issue, a really big challenge, you know you can step up and say, oh, let me take this. Of course, I have no idea whether I'll be able to do it or not, but I have the training at overcoming obstacles. And psychologically, this makes you feel so much better. Third element is flow. And when we are talking about flow, I'm talking about the psychological state. It's described in a book called Flow by Mihail Csikszentmihalyi. I think it's Mihail. And what it talks about, so basically flow is the state when you feel like you are in the zone. When you have the feeling that you started working on a problem like half an hour ago, but actually it has been 4 hours. And you've gone at it and did a tremendous advance, and things just fit. And it's a psychological state that is enabled by a few things, but is also very easy to disable. Unfortunately, many organizations just break flow in any way possible. And one of the things that breaks flow is interruptions. Any kind of interruptions. It can be your phone notifications, social media, people coming to you to ask you things, meetings. I've once worked with a company where some of the best people had meetings like every 30 minutes. So they would come from a meeting, work for 30 minutes, and then go to another meeting and so on. And this is not a way to achieve flow. So there is a bit of work to be done here to enable flow, and that is to reduce interruptions. But then the next thing is to work on problems that are that take you slightly outside your comfort zone, not a lot, but a little bit. And to allow your brain this time to get into the flow. Because if you're just breaking every 10 minutes, you probably won't go there. I think, based on what I remember, this is very different from person to person, so you need to find what works out for you, but these are some general things. Now, you can also achieve flow in things like social programming, so like pair programming or ensemble programming. I don't have a lot of experience with ensemble programming and flow. I think it can happen, particularly if you find a problem that is enthralling and if everybody contributes and tries to help. If everyone is genuinely present, working on the problem together. And I guess there probably are ways of doing that with mob or ensemble programming. In pair programming, I have been in a flow state, but it has to be some kind of chemistry between the people who are pairing, or a general open attitude. I got into flow particularly when both of us were very open to any suggestion, and we were trying things out, talking about those in a very open manner, and generally being disconnected from your code. So the code is the code, and I am a person. I am not my code. So whenever I write code, I'm not connected to it. I don't feel like it's my property. It's just an idea. It's just a way to solve a problem. And if we together find a better way to solve the same problem, it's even better. So this is how you can achieve flow with pair programming as well. Now, test-driven development, once again, is a very good way of achieving flow, because basically you take a big problem that often can be, it works best with problems that you don't know fully how to solve, and then it's a discovery process. And you go step by step. You get a small problem, solve it, next small problem, solve it, next small problem. and it takes you into this flow state, which is great. I've achieved flow many times with test-driven development. Now, I also achieve flow when writing, but that's a personal thing, I imagine. And of course, flow is the state of mind that you feel when you are playing games, usually. Games know how to do this, how to give you like small goals that build up. The next thing is craft. And craft is mostly about feeling that you have the skills required to respond to challenges. And sometimes, and often in our business, you won't, because there's always more to learn. But it's something so exciting about learning and discovering new things. The issue here is that often it comes from this difference between what you committed at and what you've actually achieved. So initially it's not the greatest thing, but then if you think about it, it's just an opportunity for you to learn more. And here what I advise is to use deliberate practice, so work on things, on micro techniques. And this can apply to various things, to writing tests, to refactoring, to naming things, to pair programming, to talking to your colleagues, to understanding users, to any number of things, formulating problems. Okay? And I think if you combine commitment and responsibility with craft, it's a really cool growth engine. It's and something that will help you grow your career, grow in general, even as a person. And I've added two things that while I was talking in the beginning. One of them is about connection. This is often undervalued. It's very, and I know it might, for many developers, this is a strange experience because we tend to be very isolated from our users. But trust me, it helps to meet your users. It really helps. Whenever I have implemented something and then worked with users to see how they are using and improving and understanding their needs and so on, this has been the most fulfilling experience for me as a developer, because I can see the connection between my work and the people that my work helps. And this is incredible. It's something that we often get this disconnect. If you only get a task of solving certain problems or implementing, I don't know, adding a new button or changing the button to another color of red, then this is not necessarily the most fulfilling experience. It can be for a while because you have a challenge, particularly when I was a beginner programmer, I had the challenge to even make the smaller tasks in a complex legacy code situation. But after a while, once you get familiar with all these tasks, it just gets easier, you know. And so once things get easier, you feel the need after a while to connect to your work at a different level. And the next level is to have this connection to users. This is the highest level, actually. Seeing people using something that you've implementing and sometimes telling you, this has saved me so many hours. It's just amazing. So definitely I advise you to try and do that. And I have no idea why so many organizations keep developers away from their users. You should meet your users again and again. Well, periodically. It doesn't have to be every day, but every once in a while. It's not something that difficult for an organization to do, and it's incredibly powerful for motivation, for feeling better as a developer. Another thing is the connection to the team. If you are working with a team that you don't really feel connection to, and this doesn't mean going to team buildings, by the way. I think that team buildings, most of the times, those organized by HR, they don't help. But it's more like, talk to your colleagues and try to find out what are their hobbies, what are they doing outside the work, what do they like, what do they dislike, and maybe you might create that chemistry for social programming as well. Or maybe you'll just gain new friends that you have coffee with and have fun with. And this points to the next level, because we need connections. And of course you have a life, as we discussed, but since you are spending so much time at work, it helps if you have connections to your team. And the last one is have fun. This is yet another thing that is difficult to understand by people who are non-technical. Developers have this wonderful, whimsical style. Like, liking Douglas Adams and the number 42, or I don't know, whatever works for you. And I'm not gonna go into stereotypes here, but some of the things I like are definitely Douglas Adams. I like many quotes. I like sci-fi. I like Dune. It's one of my favorite books of all time. I like fantasy, Lord of the Rings. And I like to have a whimsical sense of humor and, do kinds of weird drawings or have some whimsical experiences, whatever that means to you. And it helps if you have a connection to the team, because in that case, you can actually do that. Don't be serious all the time. I think this is something that I fall into as well. I tend to get very serious when I'm working with clients, and I'm trying to get more of my personality out, which is also not always being serious, but also having some whimsical thoughts or experiences, or talking about whimsical things. All right. And now let's talk a bit about some complaints that I hear about Scrum, which are related to this. There are two fundamental complaints that we often hear. Scrum is full of meetings and retrospective is useless. So let me explain to you how this model can fit Scrum as well. First of all, Scrum is best used when you have a large problem that you don't fully know how to solve. You have a user base that you think of and identify a problem for them and try to figure out how to solve that. And the way you do this is by taking the big problem, splitting into smaller problems that are roughly 2 weeks and well, attack them in 2 weeks increments, right? In 2 weeks time boxes. It's not necessarily that you will solve every problem in 2 weeks. That's not the point. You might solve 80% or 50% or 20% or 10% of the problem in 2 weeks. But the thing is, you take that big problem, split it into smaller problems, and that becomes a clear goal. So every 2 weeks you should have a clear goal. Not necessarily a clear list of things that you will do, but a clear goal. And then you as a team take commitment and take a leap of faith, right? And you say, we'll take this problem. We have no idea whether we'll be able to solve this in 2 weeks, but we trust each other and we'll work together to get as close to 100% as we can. And then at the end, we look, because we committed to it, we look at it and say, oh, maybe we solve 100%, that's good. Maybe we even solved it faster, that's even better. Or maybe we just solve 50% of it. And then we look at it and say, oh, is this enough, or do we need to work some more of it? Or maybe we solved 20% of it, and then we'll look and basically inspect and adapt. And what we'll get out of it is, oh, if we just did 10% here, if we were to be put in a situation where we need to solve this problem again, but with everything that we know now, what do we change? And this is the retrospective. Once you commit and take responsibility, it will become apparent that you can improve. If you don't, then yeah, probably it will be useless. And now, because you are working on these goals and on a problem that maybe it's a slightly complicated, you are not sure you can solve it, things change, then instead of, many people think that Scrum is full of meetings, Scrum calls them ceremonies, or talks about actually reflect and improve. But really, you could reframe this as teamwork sessions, because if you are working together on a problem, you have this goal, right? Which is probably easier to think about as a problem. You need to work together, and in order to work together, you need to talk. And now you can talk whenever during the day. Nobody will stop you, but this kind of breaks the flow. So it's better if you have certain moments for certain things. And those moments are about teamwork sessions. So let me give you an example. Perhaps you go to the daily Scrum, and what should you do? What many teams do is that every developer looks, says, okay, I've worked on this, I've done that, it's done or it's not done, and today I'll do something else, and usually I have no issue, no impediment. But that becomes boring, and it's not really collaboration. Instead, it can be a teamwork session. And the goal of this work session is to put your minds together and figure out where we are, what's the next step. And in order to do that, we need to know where we are. There are various ways of doing that. Maybe you update the board and you just look at the board and, this is where we are, okay. Maybe you have some questions where we are with that, with that, with that, with that. Or maybe you figure out a way of writing down open questions on the board. And then you can start looking at it and say, oh, so for this smaller problem, we need that. Oh, I can help with that. Let's work together, and so on. So this is another type of dynamic. It's more like a coffee break with people that hopefully you have a connection to, hopefully you have fun with, and then you can work together to figure out where you are and where to go next. So this is the approach by which you solve a lot of things, and it makes you feel happier. Because of this, I find that many criticisms against Scrum are not really about the fact that developers are not happy or they couldn't be happy with this. It's just that there are other things. Maybe you are working on a backlog that somebody has built, overanalyze the whole thing, and they just ask you to deliver every 2 weeks according to the plan. Or maybe you are not really a team because you don't have a common goal. What you have is a bunch of different separate goals, and in reality you are not working like everybody working together, but it's like one person is doing that, 2 people are doing that, and another 2 people are doing something completely different. And then of course you have no way of connecting here. There are a number of things that, well, a lot of things that can go wrong. But criticizing Scrum for these things, I think it's not always valid. And most likely than not, it's not valid. Commitment helps, responsibility helps, goals help, flow, craft, connection, having fun. And all these things can be part of your Scrum experience. And I took Scrum as an example because it's often criticized for these things, and I feel it's not valid criticism. You can criticize Scrum for a number of other things, one of them being that it doesn't include the technical, the engineering practices, which is why I strongly advise everyone to look at extreme programming and techniques like test-driven development and DevOps, and there are now a number of different movements, but most of them have come from extreme programming and kind of evolved into different places, which shows that the ideas in extreme programming are actually very, very powerful. Right. So with this being said, this was a very difficult episode to do because this is such a complex topic. And hopefully I managed to extract some useful things that you can think about. And before I close, I'd like to talk a bit about my personal feelings about developer happiness. When I first started as a developer in the 2000s, in Romania, there were many, well, maybe not many, there were organizations who had a very toxic relationship with their developers. I knew many people who were working late, like 9, 10, 12 hours a day, Saturdays, sometimes Sundays, in the hopes of delivering a project faster, in the hopes of getting bonuses and things like that. And I always felt that this is a really bad way of doing development. So this is why I'm very happy that Agile has come along and the market has evolved as well. And I no longer hear about these things. Of course, there are some times when there is extra time involved, like when you need to keep things running, or there are incidents, or there's a small crunch period, and so on, which I think some of them can be avoided, but some others we don't have a better solution, so it is what it is. And of course, people are paid extra time, and the market is much, much better. But beyond this, my general feeling is that I've seen a lot of developers who work in environments where they are kind of in a limbo state. They would like to get better, but they don't know how to progress, and they are afraid to do anything to change the status quo. And this is where I believe these things can really help. If you take responsibility, if you start taking more, committing more, from my personal experience, this has helped me a lot. And in my core, I'm really a humanist, and I'm very influenced by enlightenment. So the fundamental idea is that what I would like to see is for everyone to achieve their potential as much as possible. And part of it is psychology and relationships and so on, but part of it is work related and the techniques that you are using at work and how you approach work, how you approach writing code. And so I believe, and I'd like to do as much as possible for developers to feel better. But I think the road together goes through the things that I talked about today. Taking responsibility, commitment, leaps of faith, getting out of your comfort zone. Have fun, have connections. And this is why I really wanted to do this, to record this video, even though it's a very, very difficult topic. And I hope I've done a good enough job, and I hope that you've got at least one idea out of this that you would want to try. And if you have any questions, any comments, if you'd like some more things, some more advice, let's talk about it. Write something in the comments and let's see where it takes us. But really my hope is that it will help you or some of you get out of limbo or get slightly better or feel slightly better. And know that many people have challenges, many developers have challenges. There's so much information and so much knowledge in this industry, and so many things, so many new things come up. Some of them are not really new, but it always seems like there's some extra pressure pushing on us, and it's very common to kind of stumble upon it and say, oh, let's try to find my place and kind of stay there, and hopefully, I can feel good there. But from my experience, from what I have seen, the only way to be happier or less discontent to avoid some misery is to move ahead. And I hope that you will do that. Thank you kindly for the view, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart.